He walked into the most expensive hotel kitchen in the province with flour on his sleeve, and a 7-year-old girl holding his hand, and not a single person in that building understood what they were looking at. That was the thing about Owen Callard. He didn't present himself as anything. He was tall, a little lean from years of actual work rather than gym memberships, with dark hair that needed cutting and hands that carried the permanent ghost of a kitchen no matter how hard he scrubbed. He wore a gray canvas jacket that had seen better years and boots that were practical rather than chosen. He looked like a man who fixed things and raised a child and didn't think too hard about what other people made of that combination. What happened next? Inside that gleaming hotel kitchen in downtown Halifax would set something in motion that nobody saw coming. Drop a comment with your city. Let's see where this story finds you. The morning had started the way Owen's mornings always did, which was early, slightly chaotic, and with the particular low-grade pressure of a man who was managing more than one person's life simultaneously. He was up at 5:40 because Petra had crawled into his bed sometime around 3 in the morning and was now sleeping sideways across the mattress with her knees in his ribs and one arm draped over his face. She slept like a small determined creature claiming territory. He had no idea where she got it from. Caroline had slept in neat, contained positions, tucked into herself like a comma. Petra slept like a weather event. He slid out from under the blanket without waking her, padded to the kitchen in socks, started the coffee maker. It was an old drip machine, 12-cup, the kind that rattled when it heated. Someone had once offered him a proper espresso setup. A friend who thought gifts like that meant something. He'd said no. He liked the old one. It had been Caroline's. Most things in the house had been Caroline's once. He stood at the kitchen window with his mug and looked out at the backyard. The garden boxes she'd built needed replanting. The fence had a section that had gone soft with rot over the summer, and he hadn't replaced it yet. There was a collection of pine cones along the back step that Petra had been arranging and rearranging for 2 weeks, according to some organizational logic that Owen hadn't been able to decode. The yard looked like the yard of someone doing their best, which was accurate. Owen Callard was 38 years old. He had the quiet manner of a man who had been through something large and come out the other side still standing, which didn't look like much from the outside. He'd grown up in Antigonish, studied at Dal, spent 11 years working for a company called Meridian Culinary Systems, which designed commercial kitchen equipment and workflow systems for high-volume professional kitchens. He'd held 2 patents on ventilation integration technology that were currently licensed by manufacturers in 3 provinces and 1 in Washington state. He'd been the lead design engineer on 3 major hotel kitchen overhauls, including the Carrington Group's flagship renovation in Toronto, which had been written up in 2 trade publications. He'd been good at the work in a way that people who are genuinely good at things are good at them, not loudly, not with a lot of ceremony, just correctly and completely, and in ways that held up. He'd walked away from it 4 years ago when Caroline died, and he hadn't looked back, not because the work stopped mattering, but because Petra was 3 years old and needed one parent present and functional, and Owen had made a decision that being present and functional was the only thing that mattered now. He ran a small equipment repair and maintenance business out of a converted workshop on the edge of Dartmouth. Commercial kitchen equipment mostly. Ovens, ventilation systems, refrigeration units, the kind of industrial machinery that restaurants and institutional kitchens ran on and that nobody called about until something went wrong at the worst possible moment. He had one employee, a man named Gerald Foss, who was 56 and had spent 30 years in commercial refrigeration and knew more about compressor systems than most engineers Owen had met with actual degrees. They did solid work. They charged fair prices. Their clients called back. Nobody who booked Owen Callard for a service call knew that the man who showed up in a panel van with a toolbox had designed the kitchen systems that 3 of Halifax's best hotel restaurants were currently running on. He preferred it that way. He got Petra up at 7, which was always a negotiation. She was 7 years old and had strong opinions about the sequencing of morning activities, particularly about whether breakfast could precede getting dressed, which she believed it could, and about whether her backpack needed to be packed the night before or could reasonably be assembled at the last minute while one shoe was still missing. Owen had been having variations of this same conversation for 2 years. He'd made a certain peace with it. She came out of her room at 7:12 in her pajama top and school pants, carrying the small canvas bag she kept her drawing things in. She'd been carrying it everywhere for the past few months. It had colored pencils, a set of mechanical pencils her grandmother had sent from Cape Breton, and a sketchbook that was currently about 2/3 full of drawings of kitchen equipment in cross-section. Owen had no idea how she'd decided this was interesting. He'd never shown her anything he used to do. She'd simply started asking questions one day while he was working on a commercial convection oven and had never really stopped. "What are we having?" she asked, climbing up on the kitchen chair. "Oatmeal." "With the brown sugar?" "With the brown sugar." She nodded, apparently satisfied, and opened her sketchbook. She drew while breakfast cooked. Whatever was in her head that particular morning translated into the slightly wobbly but surprisingly precise lines of a child who was actually looking at things rather than drawing from imagination. There was one drawing taped to the refrigerator that Owen had put there himself and intended to keep. It was her version of a commercial range hood, all swooping ductwork, and a small figure at the bottom she'd labeled Dad fixing it in large, careful letters. They ate. Petra told him something about her friend Simone and a disagreement about rules during recess that had apparently been resolved and then unresolved and then resolved again. Owen listened and made the appropriate sounds and thought, not for the first time, that these ordinary Tuesday mornings, the oatmeal, the backpack argument, the complicated politics of 7-year-old friendships were the best part of what his life had become. Not a consolation, not a compromise, the actual best part. He had a service call today at the Harrington Park Hotel on Barrington Street. One of the walk-in refrigeration units in the main kitchen had been throwing an error code that the hotel's own maintenance staff couldn't resolve. He'd dealt with the Harrington's equipment before 2 years ago, a compressor issue that had taken him most of a day. The kitchen manager then had been a sensible man named Bertrand who understood that these systems were complicated and didn't hover. He didn't know if Bertrand was still there. He loaded Petra into the van and drove her to school. She brought the drawing bag, which technically wasn't supposed to come to class, but which her teacher had apparently decided to allow, because Petra used it quietly, and it made her happy, and there were larger battles to choose. He understood the logic. At the drop-off door, she unbuckled, then paused. "Are we going somewhere after?" she asked. "Service call this morning, then I'll pick you up at regular time. At the big hotel?" "Yeah." She nodded. "Can I come?" "Not today." She accepted this without drama, which was one of her better qualities. She got out, slung her bag over one shoulder, and walked into the school without looking back. The particular forward-moving confidence of a kid who had somewhere to be and intended to be there. He drove to the Harrington. The Harrington Park was an older hotel, 12 stories, stone facade. The kind of building that had been significant when it was built and had maintained that significance through enough careful renovation to keep the bones while updating the function. It had a restaurant on the ground floor that had been reviewed well, a smaller private dining room on the second, and a kitchen operation that fed both plus the event space and room service. Owen had looked at the floor plans once, years ago, when Meridian had been approached about a consultation that hadn't gone forward. He remembered the layout. He parked in the service bay, checked in with the front desk, and was taken through to the kitchen by a young man in hotel livery who introduced himself as front-of-house staff, and then clearly didn't know what to do with Owen's toolbox, and so simply walked quickly and let Owen follow. The kitchen was busy, but not chaotic. Morning prep for lunch service, 3 cooks working separate stations, the particular contained energy of a professional kitchen that was running correctly. Owen had always liked the organized noise of it. The ventilation system was doing its job. The line equipment looked maintained. Someone here cared about the operation. The walk-in was at the rear, a large unit, maybe 200 square feet, dedicated to the main refrigeration load. The error code was on the controller panel outside the door. Owen looked at it for about 8 seconds, recognized the fault signature, and began unpacking his tools. The fault was in the evaporator fan motor circuit. Not a catastrophic failure, not even close, but the kind of progressive degradation that would turn into a real problem within 72 hours if it wasn't addressed. He'd seen it before in this model, a design characteristic that Meridian had actually flagged in a technical note years ago, a note that Owen had helped write. He was 40 minutes into the job when the footsteps arrived. He heard them before he saw the source, hard soles on tile, fast, the sound of someone moving through a space with authority. They stopped about 10 feet behind him. "Excuse me." Owen turned. The man was somewhere in his mid-40s, in a dark suit that was slightly too formal for a hotel kitchen. He had the groomed look of someone in a management role above the operational level, the kind of person who visited kitchens to make decisions rather than to work in them. His name badge read Dominic Sharp, Director of Operations. He was looking at Owen the way certain people looked at tradespeople who showed up in spaces they considered belonging to a different class of person. The look was practiced enough that he probably didn't notice he was doing it. "This area is restricted to authorized personnel," Sharp said. "I'm authorized," Owen said. "Service call. Walk-in refrigeration." Sharp looked at Owen's jacket, which had a company name on the chest, but was otherwise clearly a work jacket. Then he looked at the toolbox, which was a good toolbox, the kind a person accumulated over years of serious work, but which was undeniably a toolbox in the kitchen of a 4-star hotel. "We typically use contracted service providers with proper certification," Sharp said. "Who arranged this call?" "Your kitchen manager called us in." Owen returned to his work. "The motor circuit on your evaporator fan is failing. I'm about halfway through the repair." Sharp was quiet for a moment, which was the quiet of someone recalibrating. Then, louder, in the particular register of a person who wanted to be overheard by people other than just the one he was addressing. "I'll need to verify the authorization before any further work is done. This equipment is under warranty." "It's out of warranty," Owen said without turning around. "Has been for 14 months. If it were under warranty, you'd have called the manufacturer's service team, not us." The kitchen had gone quieter. One of the cooks near the prep station was very focused on her cutting board. "I don't think you understand how we operate here," Sharp said. Owen set down his diagnostic reader. He turned around, and he looked at Dominic Sharp with the steady attention of someone who had been through things large enough to make this kind of moment feel very small. "Your evaporator motor will fail completely within the next 2 to 3 days," he said. "When it does, your walk-in temperature will rise above safe threshold for food storage, and you'll be looking at a full inventory loss and a health inspection issue the day before your weekend bookings." He paused. "I can finish this repair in another 40 minutes, or I can pack up and leave, and you can call someone who makes you feel more comfortable. Either way, the problem will still be there." Sharp's jaw moved slightly. There was a calculation happening behind his eyes, the specific calculation of a man weighing his contempt against his practical situation. The kitchen manager, a woman Owen had met briefly at check-in, appeared from the direction of the cold storage room. Her name was Sandra, she'd told him. Sandra Reeve, 15 years in commercial kitchens, the kind of person whose competence was visible in how she moved through a room. "Everything okay?" she asked, looking between them. "Mr. Sharp wanted to verify the authorization," Owen said. Sandra Reeve looked at Sharp with a very level expression. "I called them in," she said. "They've worked on our equipment before." Her voice carried the particular flatness of a professional who was tired of having her operational decisions questioned. She looked at Owen. "How long?" 40 minutes, maybe less. Let me know when you're done." She went back to her kitchen. Sharp stood there for another few seconds, then walked away without another word, the way people walked away when they'd decided the conversation was over for reasons that had nothing to do with resolution. Owen turned back to the motor circuit. The remaining work went without incident. The repair was technically clean. The issue was a failing connection at the motor harness, combined with a secondary fault in the controller board's thermal cutout relay, the same interaction that the Meridian technical note had flagged. He replaced both components, ran a diagnostic cycle, confirmed the fault codes had cleared, checked the evaporator temperature recovery over a 15-minute observation window. The unit was performing correctly. Sandra Reeve came by as he was packing up. "Good? Should be." He handed her a written summary of the repair on the clipboard he used for site documentation. "The harness connection is something to watch on this model at service intervals. I've noted it there." She read it quickly. She read it the way someone read a document when they actually intended to act on it. "I'll make sure it goes in the maintenance log." He picked up his toolbox. "That man," she said, and stopped. "Sharp, whatever he said to you, I want you to know it doesn't reflect how we operate this kitchen." "I didn't take it personally," Owen said. She looked at him steadily. He had a way of saying things plainly that sometimes surprised people. Still, she said, that's not how guests or contractors should be treated here. He thanked her and left through the service bay. He sat in the van for a few minutes before starting it. He thought about Petra, asking whether she could come. He thought about what she would have made of the kitchen, the ranges, the ventilation hoods. She would have asked questions. She would have wanted to know what everything was called and what it did and why it was that shape. She would have been politely and completely undeterred by anyone suggesting she didn't belong there. He started the van and drove back to the workshop. Gerald was in, working on a refrigeration compressor for a restaurant account. He was a quiet man, Gerald, economical with language, in the way of people who'd found that most situations didn't require more words than they needed. He looked at Owen when he came in and read something in his face with the accuracy of a man who'd been watching people for 56 years. How'd it go? Fine, Owen said. Walk in, motor harness and a relay. Maybe 2 hours total. Gerald nodded. Someone give you trouble? Duty manager type. Nothing complicated. Gerald made a sound that indicated he'd heard this before and had opinions about it and was keeping them to himself. He went back to the compressor. Owen poured coffee and sat at his bench and did the paperwork for the service call and thought about Sharp's expression when Sandra Reeve had cut him off. The particular look of a man whose contempt had been made inconvenient. He'd seen versions of that look before, not constantly, not even often, but enough times that he recognized it on contact. The assumption that a man in a work jacket with a toolbox could be safely dismissed. That the classification was obvious, and the calculus was simple. It was never as simple as people like Sharp believed. He picked up Petra at regular time. She came out of school with the canvas bag over her shoulder and a paper in her hand, which she presented to him at the van door with the seriousness of a person delivering a report. I drew the walk-in, she said. You've never seen our walk-in. I drew what I thought it looked like, she clarified. From what you said about the motor part, he looked at the drawing. She had drawn a large rectangular cold room, complete with ductwork in the ceiling, that was surprisingly close to accurate, and a small figure in the corner labeled fixed person. That's pretty good, he said. I know, she said, and climbed in. They went home. Owen made dinner. Petra told him more about the Simone situation, which had apparently reached a new phase involving a third party named Thetho, whose role was ambiguous. Owen listened and asked the right questions and thought that the social architecture of second grade was genuinely more complicated than most adult problems he'd dealt with this week. That night, after Petra was in bed, he sat at the kitchen table with the day's paperwork and his laptop and the particular quiet of a house that had 2 people in it, but only one awake. He was not a man who spent a lot of time in self-examination. He'd found, after Caroline died, that the introspection could become a kind of weather system that sat over everything if you let it. And he'd made a deliberate practice of not letting it. You did the work. You were present for the child. You kept moving. That was the thing you could control. And it was enough. His phone was on the table. It almost never rang in the evening. He kept a small circle. It rang. The number was local but unfamiliar. He let it ring twice more before answering. Owen Callard. A pause, then a woman's voice. Composed, careful in the specific way of someone choosing their words. Mr. Callard, my name is Petra Voss. I'm the general manager of the Harrington Park Hotel. He said nothing. I owe you an apology, she said, for what happened this morning in our kitchen. She paused. I've spoken with our director of operations. I'm calling personally because what you experienced was not acceptable, and I want you to hear that from me directly. He was quiet for a moment. He hadn't expected this. He appreciated it, which he told her, briefly and plainly. There's something else, she said, and her voice shifted slightly. The composure was still there, but underneath it was something that sounded like a person who had been dealing with a problem for some time and had almost stopped believing it would resolve. I'm told you have a background in commercial kitchen systems beyond the repair work. He waited. We have a situation that I've been unable to resolve through normal channels. She said it carefully. Our main ventilation system. The one that services both the restaurant kitchen and the event kitchen on the second floor. He knew that system. He'd looked at the floor plans years ago. He remembered the configuration. What's happening with it? He asked. She told him. The Harrington had hosted a significant event 6 days ago. A provincial tourism board dinner, 200 people, both kitchens running simultaneously at full capacity. Afterward, the ventilation system had developed a problem that nobody could identify with any precision. Not a failure exactly, more like a degradation. A persistent pressure imbalance between the two kitchen extraction zones that had started causing intermittent backdraft conditions in the event kitchen. Minor enough not to have triggered safety shutoffs. Serious enough that the chef de cuisine had raised a concern and Sandra Reeve had escalated it immediately. 2 service companies had been in. Both had looked at the obvious things: filters, fan balancing, damper positions. Neither had found a definitive cause. One had recommended replacing the main extraction fan unit at a cost that made the accounting department wince. The other had suggested the issue might be in the ductwork, which was more inaccessible, and had quoted a diagnostic process that would require partial kitchen shutdown over 2 days. They had a major private event in 9 days. A corporate gala, 240 people, both kitchens again. The event was non-negotiable. The client was significant. Cancellation was not being discussed because the consequences of that conversation were considerable. How long has the imbalance been present? Owen asked. He was standing now, which he hadn't realized until he heard his chair push back. Since the morning after the Futurism dinner, she said. 6 days. Has anyone checked the bypass damper position on the shared plenum trunk? He asked. A pause. I don't know what that means, she said honestly. I know what it means, he said. Can I come look at the system tomorrow? She said yes without hesitation, whatever time suited him. He came at 8 the following morning. Petra was at school. Gerald was covering the 2 service calls on the morning schedule. Owen brought his diagnostic instruments and the memory of a set of floor plans he'd looked at once 5 years ago, which was, in the useful way of things that had been looked at correctly, still present. Petra Voss met him in the lobby. She was 50, or close to it, compact and direct in her manner, with the look of someone who had been managing significant operations for long enough that she carried the work lightly because she'd built the capacity for it over many years. She shook his hand properly and thanked him for coming and took him directly to the kitchen without ceremony. Sandra Reeve was already there. She nodded at Owen in the way of someone who had been expecting him and was prepared to be useful. Dominic Sharp was not present. Owen noticed and did not remark on it. He spent 20 minutes walking the ventilation system from both kitchens, tracing the ductwork as far as it was accessible, noting the extraction points and the routing. He asked Sandra Reeve questions about the symptoms, when exactly they occurred, under what operational conditions, what the kitchen staff had noticed. She answered specifically and without embellishment, which was helpful. Then he climbed into the ceiling access above the event kitchen with a flashlight and a pressure gauge and looked at the bypass damper on the shared plenum trunk. It had been installed incorrectly at some point. Not catastrophically, not in a way that would have caused obvious problems under normal single kitchen load. But the shared trunk that handled combined extraction from both kitchens had a bypass damper, a passive pressure relief component that should have been oriented one way and was oriented the wrong way. When both kitchens ran simultaneously at high capacity, the pressure dynamics created exactly the backdraft behavior Sandra's chef had reported. The fix was not complex. The assessment took 35 minutes. He came back down and found Petra Voss and Sandra Reeve waiting. Found it, he said. He explained it without condescension and without excessive technical detail, just the functional explanation. The damper, the orientation, the pressure dynamic, the fix. Petra Voss listened with complete attention. She asked one question: how long has this been wrong? He thought about it. The failure mode only manifested under simultaneous high-load operation in both kitchens at once. If the event 6 days ago was the first time that specific operational condition had occurred since the damper was installed, the system could have been incorrect for years without anyone knowing. There might have been lower-level symptoms that looked like something else. Could have been years, he said. You'd have needed exactly the right conditions for it to show. She absorbed this. When can you fix it? Tomorrow morning if you want. Half a day. She looked at him directly. What would it have cost us if we'd gone with either of the other recommendations? One of them would have solved nothing and charged you for a new fan unit. The other might have eventually found it while taking your kitchen apart for 2 days. He paused. This is a 2-hour job with the right access. Petra Voss was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that he hadn't been expecting. I'd like to know who I'm working with, she said, and she said it in the tone of someone who had already started finding out. He fixed the damper the following morning. The repair was clean. Sandra Reeve ran both kitchens simultaneously at full extraction load for 15 minutes, while he monitored the pressure readings from the plenum access. The numbers were correct. The backdraft condition was gone. He was packing up when Petra Voss appeared. "Could I have a few minutes?" she asked. They sat in the small staff room off the kitchen. Coffee from the house machine, which was better than his. She had done some research. She said so plainly, which he appreciated. She'd found the Meridian work, the trade publication pieces, the patents. She understood, she said, why someone might step back from a career after a loss. She wasn't asking him to explain that, but she had a situation that she thought he was uniquely positioned to help with. The Harrington was planning a full kitchen renovation in 8 months. The existing systems were aging, the layout was inefficient for the volume they were now running, and the ownership group had approved a significant budget for the work. They had an architectural firm involved. They had equipment suppliers who had submitted proposals. What they did not have was someone who could look at the integration of the ventilation, extraction, refrigeration, and workflow systems as a whole and tell them whether the current proposals were actually going to work the way the hotel needed them to work. 3 companies had submitted proposals. She had concerns about all 3. She suspected the concerns were valid and couldn't fully articulate why. She needed someone who could. He listened to the whole thing before he said anything. Through the glass of the staff room door, he could see Sandra Reeve at the prep station, moving with the particular efficiency of someone who ran a kitchen because they knew it, and not just because they'd been put in charge of it. "This isn't the kind of work I do anymore," he said. "I know that." She said it without pressure, just as a statement of what she'd understood from what she'd found. "Can I ask why?" He thought about how to say it accurately. "Because I have a 7-year-old and a workshop I can run on my own schedule, and a life I built to be manageable," he said. "Not because the other work wasn't worth doing." She nodded. "Those are good reasons." She paused. "What would it take for you to look at the proposals? Just look. Not commit to anything beyond that." He looked at his coffee cup. He thought about the damper, the way he'd known where to look before he'd climbed into the ceiling, the way the floor plan had stayed in his memory because it had been interesting when he looked at it and interesting things stayed. He thought about the work of the past 3 evenings, the quiet precision of it, the specific satisfaction of a problem that had resisted everyone else and yielded to the right approach. He'd missed that. Not the visibility, not the professional world of it, but the work itself. The thing of being in front of a problem that required everything and solving it correctly. "Send me the proposals," he said. "I'll tell you what I think. That's all I'm committing to." She nodded. "Fair." She paused. "Dominic Sharp has been placed on a formal performance review. I want you to know that." He looked at her. "That wasn't necessary on my account." "It was necessary," she said, "because it happened in my hotel, and it's my standard to maintain." She met his eyes. "It had nothing to do with needing something from you. I'd decided before I called you that first evening." He believed her. He'd met enough people in management to know the difference between someone managing a situation and someone being straight with them. This was straight. He picked up his toolbox. He stopped at the door. "My daughter asked to come with me the other day," he said. "To a service call. She draws kitchen equipment, cross-sections." Petra Voss tilted her head slightly. "How old?" 7. He looked back through the glass at the kitchen. "Sometime," he said, not quite a question. Voss smiled. "The real version, bring her." He drove back to the workshop. Gerald was there, reading the parts catalog with the focused attention he brought to things that interested him. He looked up. "You're going to take the consulting work," Gerald said. It wasn't a question. "I looked at some proposals," Owen said. "That's all." Gerald looked at him over the catalog. He said, and went back to reading. Owen picked up Petra from school that afternoon. She came out holding a drawing she'd done during free period. It was the inside of a hotel kitchen, imagined, with the ventilation ducts running along the top, and a figure in the corner that was labeled, in large careful letters, "Fix Person Again." He looked at it for a long moment. "Did you draw this from what I told you?" "And from a picture I found," she said, "of a hotel kitchen." She showed him the drawing with the critical eye of someone assessing their own work. "I got the hood wrong," she said. "The angle is different in real ones." "How do you know that?" I asked Mrs. Pelletier to show me a picture on the computer, she said. During lunch, he folded the drawing carefully and put it in the door pocket of the van, which was where he put things he intended to keep. At dinner, that night she asked about the hotel. Is it fixed? Yes. What was wrong, he told her. The damper, the shared trunk, the pressure. He explained it in terms she could follow, which were fairly technical terms, because she could follow fairly technical terms. She thought about it while she ate. Then she said, so it was going the wrong way the whole time and nobody knew? Not until the right conditions, he said. She nodded, apparently satisfied with this. She went back to her dinner. After a moment, she said, without looking up, I want to see inside a real hood vent someday. I know, he said. When? He looked at his daughter. He thought about Voss saying, bring her. He thought about Gerald saying, you're going to take the consulting work with the particular certainty of a man who saw things clearly and didn't soften them. He thought about what it felt like to be in that ceiling access, with the pressure gauge, the fan loading data in his head, the memory of the floor plan still good after 5 years, the specific quality of doing the thing that only you knew how to do, not performing it, not making speeches about it, just doing it cleanly and correctly and having it hold. He thought about Caroline, who had pushed him toward every version of his own capability he'd ever been reluctant to claim, who had said, more than once, in the particular tone she used, when she was being accurate rather than encouraging, that the problem with people who were genuinely good at things was that they talked themselves out of it more often than people who were only pretty good. He'd been talking himself out of things for 4 years. Not entirely. Not in the ways that mattered. But in this specific way, the returning to something he'd held back in a way that he could feel now starting to cost him something. The proposals were going to come. Hartwell's list, Voss had said. And she'd been right in a way that was already confirmed, because Sandra Reeve had said quietly, before he left the kitchen today, that she had a colleague at another property who had the same question about their ventilation system. Word moved fast in the hospitality industry. He was going to have to decide who he was going to be when those calls came. Sometime he'd said to Voss about Petra coming to the kitchen. Not maybe. Sometime. He'd already decided. He looked at his daughter across the dinner table. 7 years old, drawing ductwork in hotel kitchens she hadn't seen, asking the right questions about dampers and pressure dynamics, with the complete unself-consciousness of someone who didn't know yet that these were supposed to be niche interests. She had his memory for systems. She had Caroline's refusal to accept that anything worth understanding was outside her reach. She had no idea yet what that combination was going to mean for her. He wasn't going to decide it for her. He was going to let her be 7 and let it unfold the way things unfolded, when you gave them room and attention and didn't try to rush the conclusion. But he was going to call Petra Voss in the morning and tell her he'd looked at the proposals and had some thoughts if she wanted to hear them. That was enough. That was where to start. He washed the dishes. Petra sat at the kitchen table with her sketchbook, drawing something new, her pencil moving with the quiet concentration of a child who was completely inside what she was doing. Owen looked at her over his shoulder from the sink, at the drawing bag on the chair beside her, at the canvas worn soft at the corners from being carried everywhere. He thought about the morning, the service bay, Sharp's voice, the specific assumption in it. He thought about what Sharp hadn't seen and what Voss had taken the trouble to find out. He thought about the difference between those two responses and what it said about the kind of attention people chose to pay or not pay to what was actually in front of them. You couldn't make people see correctly. You could only be, accurately, what you were. In the service bay, in the ceiling access above the event kitchen, in the small repair workshop on the edge of Dartmouth with one good employee and a fair billing rate. What you were was what you were, and it was there to be found by anyone who looked with any actual care. He dried his hands on the kitchen towel. Caroline's kitchen towel, the last one from the set she'd bought, still going. Petra looked up briefly. She showed him the drawing without comment. It was the hood vent. She'd gotten the angle right this time. Yeah, he said. That's it. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to drawing. He sat down across from her and pulled the stack of mail he hadn't dealt with toward him and started going through it. And the house was warm and quiet, and outside the November dark had come down early the way it did in Nova Scotia, pressing against the windows with a kind of honest insistence, And the small kitchen light was enough, and his daughter was drawing things she didn't yet know she would someday build. And Owen Callard was, for the first time in a long time, not trying to decide whether he was ready for what was coming next. He just was.